So this next question is going to be directed towards Dr. Bobby Guay and Mr. Daryl Richardson. We're going to start with a more broad question of just what do you think it means to be a man in today's society, especially when you're facing, obstacles, and typical struggles that you might see, such as the criminal justice system.
All right, I guess I can jump in first, and again, to Josh, and the rest of the panelists, the organizers. I want to say indeed is a blessing and an honor to be on here with you all. Excuse my voice. I've been doing a lot of yelling and screaming in the last few weeks, so I'm trying to still get my voice together. But that question is indeed a broad one. But the way I will address it first is I feel that there's been kind of a watered down version and definition of what a man should be or what a man is in today's society. I'm originally from Africa. I was born in Liberia, West Africa, and came into this country in '85. And I remember vividly my father speaking in regards to our tribe. I come from a tribe called the Bassa tribe. And one of the traditions in that tribe, you all have heard about the rites of passage. That rites of passage was something that was very, very evident in our tribal traditions. In the African tradition, they would take boys around the age of 10, 11, the elder men in the village would take them into the hinterland sometime up to a month or so. And during that time, those young men would go through a mind, body, and spiritual transformation. And when they go through that transformation, they return back to the village, signifying they have gone through their rites of passage. Now they can come back to their village, to their community, to their families, and pour back into their families, in their village, in their society. We don't have that rites of passage today as a community, as a nation, as a world. We may have segments of even on the continent of Africa now, that tradition is now being watered down. We're losing that now. So that definition of what a man is has been watered down. So at this point, I see three things that I do when I'm working with my young men. I tell them that as a man, you're responsible for three things. Number one, your spirituality, your faith, whatever you want to call it, or whatever God or whatever you profess, that belief system in a higher power, whatever it is, that's your number one commitment. Number two, your family. Your family is the next obligation and responsibility as a man. And whatever you do to pour and lead your family in providing them those skills, those values, and those morals that would then take them to the next level and be productive citizens. And lastly, there's the obligation of community. So when I speak to my young men, I tell them is your faith, your family, and community. And anything else after that, they can fight for the next position after that. But it's those three things I feel that men and the concept of a man today should hold true to themselves, hold themselves responsible for those three aspects of life. So I can pause right there and let my brother, Coach D, kind of chime in.
So, Mr. Richardson, if you care to take as well.
Absolutely. Certainly want to echo the sentiments of everyone, Bobby, Mr. Lewis, the moderators, the host. Certainly want to echo the sentiments of everyone who have taken the time to be a part of this and put this together. I think that's a multifaceted question, obviously. And I'd also think it depends on who you're speaking to, who you're asking that question to. I think the concept of a man for many, as Mr. Guay spoke on, it means more for people of an older age, right? It varies if you're talking about age demographic. Me almost being 40 years old, that message and that meaning of a man or male is going to vary from someone who's in their early 20s. and partly because of what Mr. Way spoke on as it relates to traditions being passed down. And we can speak on a litany of reasons on why those traditions have not been passed down. For me, as well as you look at the racial demographic, if you look at the racial demographic and you ask a Caucasian male or possibly an Indian male, an Asian or Hispanic male, that answer may also vary based on the racial disparity, right? Because of certain cultures and because of certain historical things that have taken place that are passed down or may not be passed down. So specifically speaking for me, there are also three principles that I abide by as a man, as a male. I focus on leadership, I focus on providing, and I focus on protecting, right? So those are the three pillars for me as a man. When I see men, specifically Black men, who are doing those three things. And when I say lead, obviously that provides context, right? So I'm talking about leading in a positive manner. So when I think of a man or a male, someone who's positively leading their family, who's positively leading their community, someone who's providing and protecting for their family as well as their community, all right? So I think generally speaking of a male, speaking of a man, I think those things have been diluted, and has been somewhat of a paradigm shift for, again, a litany of reasons. We can speak, I know we have Officer Lawrence and Professor Rapp. And by the way, I just want to say, I think I just fell in love with Mr. Rapp as he was speaking. So I love you, man. Like that was some great stuff. So that was really good. But I think if you ask, also, you can look at the judicial system for a lot of the reasons for why Black leaders or Black males are not where they are, right? Like, I think you have to look at the judicial system. I think you have to look at the economic disparity. I think you even also have to go back to slavery and things that have happened since we've been here. And I'm specifically speaking about Blacks and Black people. So I can speak on that for a much longer time, but to try to be as quickly and as candid as I possibly can to answer your question directly. For me, it's leadership. For me, it's providing. For me, it's protecting. And I think those things have been a shift. And I also think it depends on who you're asking from a racial demographic as well as from an age demographic.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. We can go back to Joshua if you want to follow up with some more questions for Professor.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Albert. Thank you, Coach D, for a great response. Thank you, Dr. Guay. I'm going to start with you, Professor Rapping, for this next question, then we'll flip it over to Attorney Lewis. Professor Rapping, specifically, what do you think that, this is going to be kind of a broader question, what do you think the impact that the educational and then criminal justice system has on each other, with those two directly correlating with each other? What do you think the impact of each other for those two things is? So basically, how does the educational system have an impact on, people that are going into the criminal justice system, and then vice versa?
So I want to say to Coach D, I love you too, man. And I'm actually just enjoying hearing all of the panelists because it's helpful to me. So one thing about me, I am obviously a white man raising a Black son. I have biracial children. And, I think I figured out probably when my son was about 6, that as I try to model what it means to be a man for my son, I can't model the way I move through the world because my son can't get away with things that I've grown up sort of understanding I could live through. So I no longer coast through stop signs when my son is in the car with me. If someone cuts me off, I don't, get into an argument with them or give them the finger. I don't jaywalk when my son is around because I understand I can live that way. He's a Black boy and he's not going to be able to survive that. There was a video of police in, I think it was Tulsa, Oklahoma, just a couple of days ago I saw, where 2 13-year-olds, a year older than my son, walking down the street in the middle of the street because there were no sidewalks. They got placed face down and handcuffed. And so you ask about the link between that and our education system. My son, when he was in 5th grade, he went to a predominantly white elementary school. He was the only Black boy in his class, and they had a substitute teacher. And he, along with the other kids, were sort of cutting up, like 10-year-olds do. He was 10 at the time. And my son's a great kid. He plays a lot of sports. Coaches love him, but he's a 10-year-old. And so they were cutting up. And the substitute teacher singled him out and said, when you grow up, if you don't learn to behave, you're either going to end up in a gang, on drugs, or in jail. Now, my son's grown up around public defenders. He knew exactly what that meant. My wife was an educator for years before she joined me in starting Gideon's Promise. But I think what that tells me is the way we view Black children, and particularly Black boys in the school system, oftentimes can be a pipeline into the criminal justice system. Last thing I'll say is my daughter's 15. She's a rising junior at Grady High School. She's part of a community of Black high school students in Atlanta called Teens Looking for Change. And they are pushing, they're out rallying, they're out speaking because they understand that the children in their peer group are at greater risk than the kids who grew up in Buckhead in Morningside. So it's a pipeline, and I think you're right to make that link.
Great response. Great response. I love it. Mr. Lewis, do you have any thoughts on that question?
I fell in love with education real early. And when I say I fell in love with education, I fell in love with, I suspect, the competition of education, not necessarily the classes and spending the money. Obviously, I spent all of my 20s in school. It's sort of interesting as I listen to Professor Rapping. Professor Rapping comes at it from a sort of institutional, systematic standpoint, and I come at it from a more individual standpoint. So one of the things that's sort of odd to me is listening to prosecutors who are a part of the system talk about the system like there's something separate from the system. For me, there is not the system. I'm part of the system. I'm part of it. So if the criminal justice system is not working, it's somehow my fault. So I don't want to add any dysfunction to the criminal justice system, which is why I said earlier, I'm not going to coerce anybody into ultimately entering any plea. So my answer to this question about education and the criminal justice system really almost goes back to the question about what is it to be a man? I'm in the middle of the plant paradox right now. And one of the things that the author suggests is that if you feed chickens fish, the meat tastes like fish and not chicken. And that's what I think it is to be a man. Being a man is being conscious of what you're feeding yourself. If you go to school and the teacher's not teaching you math, and I know they're not teaching you math, you have a responsibility to get on YouTube and learn the math yourself. You have a responsibility to go online and learn the material yourself, as opposed to the 6 or 7 hours on the YouTube just watching videos, or the 6 or 7 hours on unsocial media. I think you have some sort of obligation. Oftentimes what happens in my job, we go out to the jail. Obviously, you've been out to the jail with me. Clients will say something like, you and me are the same. You and me are the same. Well, we're sort of the same. I really have put an emphasis on education. I put an emphasis on education too. Okay, then you should have no problem with this problem right here. 1/2 plus 1/3 equals. What's the most popular answer? 1/5. That's wrong. 2/5. That's still wrong, sir. 2/6, that's wrong also. So how does a person exercise judgment when they don't have the basics? We're talking about 4th grade fractions now. How does a person exercise judgment about what I should do in a criminal case when I'm looking at discovery, when I don't have the foundation of logic? Math is the foundation of logic. If I don't have 1/2 plus 1/3 and I'm 23, it's difficult for me to believe that I can weigh the evidence in the case and actually come up with what decision I should make in terms of going forward or not going forward. But the beauty is I'm innocent, so I'm going to trial. That's it.
Thank you, guys. Thank you both. That was a very important lead up to what we're going to be talking about soon. I'm going to go ahead and pass that next question on to Albert.
Thank you, Josh. This question is for Dr. Guay and Mr. Richardson as well. For students that have had trouble in their home environment, what are some of the things that you try to teach to prevent them from using their situation at home as an obstacle or excuse from their success in the classroom?
Coach D, you can jump on this first, brother.
Great question, Albert, and great responses by Mr. Rappy. Being someone who interacts with, at very minimal, 250 kids a day, I often try to have them to cling on to something that's motivating to them. Obviously, there have been detrimental and very tough obstacles presented, adverse situations. Everyone struggles with something. Could be an economic adverse situation. It could be poverty. It could be mental and emotional challenges. It could be of various things that people deal with. I often have them cling to something that's going to motivate them. If you aspire to attain certain goals, let's actually have a plan of action to attain those goals. Oftentimes, kids, I ask my kids, my mentees, or my basketball players, what are your goals? What do you want to be? And they'll tell me NBA, they'll tell me a scientist, they'll tell me whatever the answer is. But my thing is, what is the actual plan in getting to what you're saying that you want to be? Because we can often say what we want, but realistically, when trying to execute a plan, we're not actually going through the steps to make that a reality. So I often talk to them about things that are motivating to them and having a realistic goal in order to attain those things that they're setting forth for themselves. It's not only talking about wanting to be in the NBA. It's not only talking about it. It's not only giving mere rhetoric about these things. I try to use various motivational tactics with being able to help them get to where they're trying to go. Now, what's key into those things are actually having the relationship, right? Like we have to, I think everyone here is probably fully invested in what they're trying to do with the children or the people that they're impacting. We would assume that everyone here is not just here because of a paycheck. We would assume that people are actually, excuse me, invested in the betterment of the people that we deal with. So with that being said, we have to establish and cultivate real relationships to know what's going to help benefit their situation. We can't just be hyperbole. It can't just be rhetoric that we're talking. We have to actually understand them. There has to be some level of symbolism. There has to be some believability in what we're saying. As me and Mr. Gway, who deals with children often, they have to be some believability in what we're saying and that we truly care. So one of the things that I do is I try to make them cling on to something that's going to help motivate them and also be realistic in the goals that they're trying to attain, although they're dealing with adverse situations.
Yeah, my brother, definitely great points, man. And I echo a lot of what you're saying, being in the trenches with these young people. One of the critical things Coach D said is the relationship piece. Because if we don't know the narrative and the story of individual students, right? Individual students, and that's taking the time to listen to them. Oftentimes, adults and elders in this village that we're in, we want to tell these young people how to go, how to navigate, and how to get out of a situation, instead of truly listening to them, sometimes for what they're not saying. Listen for what they're saying, but sometimes we have to listen to also those things that they're not saying. We have parents for years, being a parent. I have 3 boys. One is in the Army right now. He's 25 years old, and I have 2 more coming up. And we know the natural transition of young people is they begin to leave us a little bit more and have more autonomy and with their friends and their peer groups. So here's where that transition and that impact comes. How can I then impact this young person and still be that voice of reasoning for them? When we have young people in our schools, for me as a counselor for over 18 years, when a student is going through their trials, going through some of those hard times, my first thing I ask them is, what do you want to see happen? What do you really want to see happen? And then for me, that kind of gives me a gauge of where they are emotionally. Are they able to really get that grit and that resiliency to be able to deal with the situation, for them to be able to deal with whatever life trials that they're going through and push through? Because if I can ask them where they want to go, at least they can begin to empower themselves and say, you know what, I can do that. Secondly, is actually showing them where they can go, and have been mentored for over 20 years. And one of the key pieces of mentoring young men, particularly in the juvenile system as well as in schools that are typically left in the margins, is exposing them. So we do a lot of exposure. If it means taking them to college visits, if it means bringing men in like our dear brother Lawrence and brother Rapping to speak to them, exposing them to things that they haven't seen or they haven't experienced. I think those things we continue to do. We continue and give them the reality. Despite my situation I'm in now, there is something down the line. And now somebody that cares, not just telling me about it, they're showing me about it. So I think those are key components of really uplifting and building the resiliency in our young people, when they're going through any kind of trials, as we impact them and work with them.
Thank you, Dr. Guay. Josh?
Yeah, so
Thanks. And Josh, real quick, and that was a little plug for Rapping and Lewis. So I'm going to be calling on y'all to speak to my young man.
Oh, that's fine. Dr. Guay, let me tell you a little secret. 20 years, I may get an invitation once every 3 years.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think I speak well, but I suspect I say things that people don't necessarily want to hear in the way that they want to hear it. Professor Rapping says he doesn't, he drives differently to show his boys sort of like the best driving behavior. I do the exact opposite. I'm a speeder. So my children have been stopped in the car with me 3 or 4 or 5 times with the officers, and I show them how to talk to an officer. Do you know why I stopped you? Yes, I do know why you stopped me. I'm a speeder. Right, that's what it is. And so I'm not going to sit here and play this game. No, I don't know why you stopped me. You stopped me because I'm black. Sir, I couldn't even tell you were black. You were doing 30 miles over the speed limit. What are you talking about? You're black. Get out of here. So I have to show the boys how to talk to the officer. Do you understand?
Absolutely.
There's no marijuana wafting out the car. The license, registration, and insurance is in order. And I'm going to talk very politely and respectfully to the police officer. When he says something crazy, like all the lanes are equal, that's what he said coming south on 75. Sir, they're not all equal. The left lane's the passing lane. That's why they say slower traffic, keep to the right. It's a passing lane. So my children can see me engage with the police officer. I'm not being disrespectful. I'm not going to just let you tell me anything, but I'm not going to be disrespectful. And at no time am I going to be arguing. I'm going to be following directions. So I'm sort of the opposite. I need you to see how to interact with police. You are going to have contact with police.
And I love that. And I want that. In the work that Coach D would tell you, the work we do with with our young men, we absolutely want that. But let me just point out why, and you can even respond to this. I know we're going off the script, but I can't pass this option out. Why do you feel comfortable and confident speaking like that? Because of knowledge, the knowledge you've gained, the knowledge and the experience that you've gained over time, your experiences. You had to do some studying to get to that point to be able to speak like that. So for our young men,
I sort of disagree. Let me say this. Let me say this. I started with the phrase, in order to be a man, you have to be conscious of what you're feeding yourself.
Absolutely.
I had to leave home at 20. So my mother might say I left. I might say she put me out. That's not important. 20, I had to go because I didn't want what she was feeding me. She loved me. She loved me. She appreciated me, but I didn't want what she was feeding me. And if I don't want what she's feeding me, I got to go someplace else and get what it is I think I should be eating. We're not talking about 54 now. We're talking about 18, 19, 20.
Right.
I had an understanding of what it's going to be. I'm going to die one day. But what's not going to happen is I'm not going to die 50 times because I'm scared to do this and scared to do that, scared to go here, scared to go there. Yes. I see Coach D wants to chime in.
Yes, awesome. I love the dialogue. And Alex, guys, we apologize, but I want to take the opportunity as well, Mr. Guay, to ask Mr. Lawrence, So when you're giving your children these teachable moments of knowing how to properly conduct themselves, the proper etiquette, so on and so forth, is that the solution to no longer Black people being killed and mistreated? Is that the ultimate solution?
No, of course
Okay.
not. No. Listen. I don't know how they're going to die. I don't know how they're going to die. In my mind, if I look at the statistics and where I operate, I'm either going to die at the hands of a Black man or I'm going to die wrapped around a tree. I don't think I'm going to die at the hands of a police officer. I'm talking about where I go. I go into rough neighborhoods. I go knocking on doors looking for witnesses that they say I'm never going to find. I go looking for Peanut and Black because you say they're alibi witnesses, and then they tell me that they're not alibi witnesses. I go chase them because I drop 50 speedy trial demands a year, and you're going to trial. If Black has information, he's at the strip club, I'm going to the strip club to find Black so that he can come to court and say that you were with him in Albany when they believe that you were here in Lawrenceville. I'm going to do it. I don't know if anybody else is going to do it, but I'm going to do it. I'm not sitting around worrying about dying. I'm worrying about living. I want to be the person that says I have had a positive, productive impact on the system as an individual. I'm not looking for the system to change. I'm part of the system, and I've got to try to make the system work the way that it's supposed to. And for me, that's jury trials. For me, that's jury trials. I'm not coercing nobody into taking a plea. For me, that ultimately is jury trials. And when I hung a shingle 20 years ago, I said that. I'm not forcing anybody to take a plea. You want a trial, you're going to have a trial. And let's be clear, that means that I have at least 60 losses. How many cases do you win? I have at least 60 losses because 5 times a year, a person that makes a full confession on DVD, they decide they can't take the punishment. So I have to go to trial and get punched in the mouth for like 3 or 4 days, because at the end of the 4th day, the jury's going to watch them on DVD say, yeah, I shot her in the face. I don't know why we're at trial. We're at trial because they can't take the punishment. Okay.
Some great dialogue, guys. I know everybody wants, this is some great dialogue. I know everybody wants a chance to speak, but we're going to move on to the next question because it's time. I know everyone's smiling. Everyone wants to talk. It's great. This is great.
Stop. A pretextual stop, basically, for bowling, for other folks that don't know, that's where the officers see your vehicle at a certain time of day or night, and they say they pull you over because it's a high crime area. Here's the most important thing you need to know about pretextual stops. The law says that they're legal. So you don't have to like it. There's a lot of things you might not like. The law says if my wife gets a TPO against me, I can't contact her. She can call me 50 times. And if I call her back one time, I'm going to get in trouble.